The dust of the road clung to Ilara like a second skin, a gritty shroud mirroring the parched landscape of her hopes. Each step was a measured testament to the ache in her left leg, a throb that sang a familiar, mournful tune from hip to heel. The advertisement, tacked to a weathered post in a town she'd already forgotten the name of, had been a sliver of light in an encroaching darkness. Cleaner wanted. Remote location. Inquire Jedediah Thorne. Willow Creek Ranch. Remote was a blessing and a curse, isolation a shield from scornful eyes, yet also a lonely abyss if this, too, proved a dead end. Willow Creek Ranch, when it finally materialized from the heat haze, was less a sanctuary and more a testament to neglect. The main house sagged, its paint peeling like sunburnt flesh, the porch railing splintered, the yard choked with stubborn weeds that seemed to mock any attempt at order. It was a place that had surrendered. A figure emerged from the shadowed doorway of the barn, tall and lean, moving with the heavy grace of a man long burdened. Jedediah Thorne. His face was all harsh angles and shadow, ice the color of a stormy sky, deeply set and wary. He watched her approach, his expression unreadable, a flintlock of a man, primed and dangerous. She halted a respectful distance away, the silence stretching taut between them, broken only by the sigh of the wind through the dry grass. "You Thorne?" she asked, her voice raspy from disuse and dust. He nodded slowly, his gaze drifting pointedly to her uneven stance, the way she favored her good leg. A flicker of something, dismissal, perhaps, crossed his features. "Saw your notice," she continued, clutching the worn carpet bag that held all her worldly possessions. For the cleaner he said nothing for a long moment, the silence amplifying the vast emptiness of the prairie around them. Then, his voice, low and gravelly, "The work's hard." Long days, it wasn't a question, but a statement meant to dissuade. She straightened, as much as her body allowed, a spark of defiance igniting in her tired eyes. "I ain't afraid of hard work, mister." Only of starving. His gaze remained skeptical, sweeping over her again. She knew what he saw, a woman, alone, marked by misfortune. Not the sturdy, able-bodied help he'd undoubtedly envisioned. But then, his eyes lingered on the house, on the visible decay that was a mirror to the desolation she sensed within him. A grimace tightened his lips. He needed help. Perhaps more than he was willing to admit. "Sun up to sundown," he stated, his tone flat. "Board and a small wage. If you can manage." It wasn't a welcome, but it wasn't a rejection either. For Ilara, who had known far worse, it was enough. "I can manage," she said, the words a quiet vow. He gave a curt nod towards the house. "Kitchen's through there. Find a place. Start tomorrow." He turned then, without another word, and disappeared back into the barn's gloom, leaving her on the edge of his broken world, a fragile seed of hope taking tentative root in barren ground. She was in dire straits, a whisper away from vanishing into the unforgiving frontier, until he, in his own wounded silence, had not turned her away. The first days were a silent ballet of scrutiny and labor. Ilara moved through the dust-choked rooms of Jedediah's house like a ghost with a purpose. Her limp was a constant companion, but her hands, though bearing faint, silvery scars across the knuckles from a long-ago burn, were surprisingly deft. She scrubbed floors until the wood grain re-emerged from beneath layers of grime, beat rugs until the prairie winds carried away years of accumulated sorrow, and polished windows until the pale sunlight, hesitant at first, dared to venture inside. Jedediah was a shadow, always present, rarely seen. He'd be sharpening tools in the barn, mending fences at the far edge of his property, or simply sitting on the porch, staring out at the horizon, a rifle resting across his knees. But she felt his eyes on her, observing, weighing. His silence was a heavy blanket, yet she found it preferable to the pitying whispers or cruel jeers she'd endured in towns. Here, in this isolated pocket of the world, her disability was simply a fact, like the scarcity of rain or the hardness of the soil. She adapted, her movements economical and precise. When a high shelf proved out of reach, she found a sturdy crate. When her leg ached fiercely, she would pause, lean against a door frame for a moment, invisible to him, then resume her task. She asked for nothing, complained of nothing. She simply worked, her quiet industry a stark contrast to the stagnant grief that had permeated the ranch. One evening, after a particularly grueling day clearing out a storeroom thick with cobwebs and forgotten relics, she found a freshly chopped stack of firewood beside the kitchen stove, more than usual. No words were exchanged. The next morning, he found a patch on his work-worn denims neatly mended, the stitches small and even. He ran a calloused thumb over them, a muscle twitching in his jaw, before pulling them on. Meals were eaten in the cavernous kitchen, the table long enough for a dozen, yet seating only two, at opposite ends. The silence was thick, but slowly, imperceptibly, its quality began to change. It was less the silence of strangers, more the quiet contemplation of two solitary creatures sharing a den. He'd watch her hands as she ate, the scarred knuckles surprisingly graceful as she handled her fork. She'd catch his gaze sometimes, a quick, unreadable flicker before he looked away. The house itself seemed to breathe easier, the air lighter. The scent of lye soap and lemon oil replaced the musty odor of decay. She found a chipped vase one day and placed a spray of hardy prairie wildflowers on the windowsill. It was a small splash of color in a world of browns and grays, and when Jedediah saw it, he paused, his expression uncharacteristically still. He said nothing, but the next day, the vase hadn't been moved. The rhythm of their days settled into a pattern, shared labor, shared silence, and the slow, almost imperceptible thawing of a frozen landscape, both outside and within. The chill of late autumn began to creep into the mornings, painting the prairie grass with frost. Inside the Thorn Ranch, however, a fragile warmth was taking hold, less about the crackling fire in the hearth and more about the quiet understanding that had begun to bridge the chasm between its two occupants. Jedediah found himself anticipating the scent of coffee Elara brewed before dawn, a richer aroma than he'd managed in years. He'd leave a pail of fresh milk on the back step, knowing she preferred it with her morning meal. She, in turn, learned the specific way he liked his sparse belongings arranged, the subtle cues of his moods, a tightening around his eyes meant a difficult memory had surfaced, a slower pace in his work indicated a weariness that went bone deep. One afternoon, while dusting the heavy oak mantelpiece in the seldom-used parlor, Elara's fingers brushed against a small, intricately carved wooden songbird, its surface worn smooth with handling. It was tucked away, almost hidden. As she picked it up, Jedediah entered the room, his footsteps unnervingly silent on the newly cleaned floorboards. He stopped, his gaze fixed on the bird in her hand. The air grew tense. "My wife, Clara," he said, his voice a low rumble, rougher than usual. She favored bluebirds. He didn't elaborate, didn't explain the rawness that edged his tone, the way his hands clenched at his sides. He just stood there, a man carved from granite and grief. Elara carefully placed the bird back on the mantel, her touch gentle. "It's beautiful work," she offered quietly, her own history of loss, of being set aside, echoing in the space between them. She knew the language of unspoken pain. Later that week, a fierce norther blew in, trapping them indoors for 2 days. The wind shrieked around the eaves of the house like a banshee, rattling windows and underscoring their isolation. They sat by the fire, Jedediah oiling his rifle, Elara mending a thick wool blanket. The enforced proximity felt different now, less a trial and more a quiet truce. "This leg," Jedediah said suddenly, his voice startling in the relative quiet, his eyes on the fire, not her. "How'd it happen?" Elara's needle stilled. She looked down at her hands. "A runaway wagon, when I was a girl. He was drinking. Folks in town said it was my own fault for being in the way. Easier to blame a child, I suppose, than a man's thirst." She didn't look at him, but she felt his gaze. There was no pity in the ensuing silence, only a deep, resonant quiet. "Some folks carry their burdens on the inside," he observed, after a long pause, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "Others, where the world can see them." It was the closest they'd come to acknowledging the invisible walls around their hearts, and the shared understanding that some wounds, seen or unseen, never truly faded, but merely became a part of who you were. The storm outside raged on, but within the small circle of firelight, a different kind of weather was shifting, a subtle clearing in the long winter of their souls. The turning point was not a grand declaration, but a series of small, significant shifts. Jedediah began to speak more, not much, but enough. He'd point out a hawk circling overhead, its shadow a fleeting cross on the sun-baked earth, or comment on the way the creek swelled after a rare rain. He started leaving his study door ajar, the room where he kept his ledgers and maps, a silent invitation into a more personal space. Ilara, in turn, found her voice less hesitant. She'd ask about the ranch, its history, the names of the distant mesas that painted the horizon at sunset. She learned that Clara had been a schoolteacher, with a laugh like wind chimes, and that Jedediah had built this ranch for her with his own hands, a fortress against a harsh world that had ultimately failed to protect her from a swift, brutal fever. His guilt was a raw, open wound he'd hidden for years. Ilara listened, her quiet empathy a balm he hadn't realized he craved. She spoke little of her own past beyond the accident, but her resilience, her refusal to be defined by her injury or the cruelty of others, spoke volumes. One crisp afternoon, as Jedediah was repairing a section of corral fence, 3 riders appeared on the horizon, moving with an arrogant slowness that set his teeth on edge. They weren't locals. Their clothes were too flashy, their saddles too ornate for working cowhands. As they drew closer, a cold knot formed in Jedediah's stomach. He knew them. Figures from a past he'd fought hard to bury, men who thrived on intimidation and easy pickings. Their leader, a burly man named Silas Blackwood with eyes like chips of obsidian, reined in, his gaze sweeping over the ranch with open disdain, then settling on Ilara as she emerged from the house, a basket of laundry in her arms. A cruel smirk twisted his lips. "Well, Thorn," Blackwood drawled, his voice oily. "Didn't figure you for the domestic type. Or for hiring damaged goods." His eyes lingered on Ilara's limp with pointed malice. Jedediah straightened, his hand instinctively moving closer to the Colt Peacemaker holstered at his hip. The air crackled with sudden, sharp tension. "State your business, Blackwood, or ride on business." Blackwood chuckled, a humorless sound. "Heard you were holed up out here, gettin' soft. Figured we'd pay a visit. See if you had anything worth sharing." His gaze flicked towards the house, then back to Ilara, predatory and insulting. Before Jedediah could speak, Ilara set her basket down. Her face was pale, but her eyes held a spark of pure, unadulterated defiance. "This is a private home, sirs," she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the charged silence. "Mr. Thorn ain't interested in your kind of company." Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "Feisty little cripple, ain't she?" One of his men snickered. Jedediah moved then, a blur of motion, stepping between Ilara and the riders, his hand now resting on the butt of his gun. "That's enough," he said, his voice deadly calm, a promise of violence simmering beneath the surface. "You've got no business here. Leave." Now for a moment, it seemed Blackwood might challenge him. The man's eyes flickered to his own sidearm. But then he saw the look in Jedediah's eyes, not the haunted weariness he'd known before, but a cold, focused fury, the look of a man with something precious to protect. Blackwood sneered. "Getting soft, Thorn? Letting a woman fight your battles?" He spat on the ground. "We'll be back. When you're less distracted." With a final, contemptuous look, he wheeled his horse and, followed by his companions, rode away, their laughter a discordant echo against the vast silence of the prairie. Jedediah didn't relax until they were distant specks. He turned to Ilara, his expression tight. "You shouldn't have," he began, but she met his gaze, unflinching. "They had no right," she said simply. He saw then not her disability, not her past hardships, but an unyielding strength that mirrored the toughest steel. In that moment, something shifted irrevocably. He was no longer just her employer, nor she merely his cleaner. They were two souls standing against a common darkness, and the fragile sanctuary he had offered her had, in turn, become something he would defend with his life. The encounter with Blackwood left an uneasy residue, a metallic taste of fear in the air. Yet, it had also forged a new, undeniable bond between Jedediah and Ilara. The pretense of mere employment had been stripped away, revealing the raw, protective instinct he felt for her, and the quiet courage she possessed. They worked side by side in the days that followed, shoring up defenses, unspoken anxieties hanging between them. Jedediah checked his ammunition, his movements precise and grim. Ilara, noticing the strain in his shoulders, brewed stronger coffee, kept the fire stoked against the growing autumn chill, her presence a silent reassurance. The expected attack came not with a dramatic charge, but under the cloak of a moonless night, heralded by the nervous whinny of a horse in the corral. Jedediah was instantly alert, grabbing his rifle. "Stay down, Ilara, away from the windows," he ordered, his voice low and urgent. But Ilara was already moving, not in fear, but with a determined purpose. She knew this house now, its creaks, its shadows, its vulnerabilities. While Jedediah took up a position by the front window, she darted to the kitchen, barricading the flimsy back door with the heavy oak table, her movement surprisingly swift despite her limp. Gunshots erupted outside, splintering the night. Glass shattered in the parlor. Jedediah returned fire, methodical and controlled. Ilara, heart pounding, grabbed the old, heavy cast-iron skillet, her only weapon. She heard scuffling at the back, the wood of the door groaning under pressure. One of Blackwood's men, thinking the rear an easier entry, was trying to force his way in. As the door splintered, revealing a leering face in the dim light, Ilara swung the skillet with all her might. The crack of iron meeting bone was sickeningly loud, followed by a grunt and the thud of a falling body. She stood panting, the heavy skillet still raised, a fierce protectiveness blazing in her eyes. The fighting was brief but brutal. Another of Blackwood's men tried to flank Jedediah through a side window, but Jedediah, anticipating the move, met him with a blast that sent him reeling back into the darkness. Silas Blackwood himself, enraged, charged the front porch, firing wildly. Jedediah took a bullet graze to the arm, pain searing through him, but he held his ground, firing back with deadly accuracy. A choked cry, and Blackwood crumpled, his reign of malice ended in the dust of the ranch he'd sought to violate. Silence descended, heavy and ringing. Jedediah lowered his rifle, breathing hard, the sting in his arm a dull throb. Ilara rushed to his side, her face pale but resolute. "You're hit!" She tore a strip from her apron, her hand surprisingly steady as she pressed it against the bleeding wound. "It's just a graze," he grunted, but his eyes met hers, filled with a raw, undeniable emotion. He saw no fear in her gaze, only concern, and a fierce, shared triumph. "You were remarkable," he managed, his voice hoarse. She offered a shaky smile. Learn to be resourceful, he looked towards the back door, then back at her, a new respect dawning. She hadn't just hidden, she had fought, defending their home, their shared space. In the aftermath of violence, surrounded by the quiet desolation of the prairie night, they stood together, equals. The ghosts of his past, the shadows of her hardships, seemed to recede in the face of their combined strength. The ranch, once a monument to his grief, had become a bastion, defended not just by his gun, but by her unyielding spirit. The fire within its hearth, and within their hearts, burned brighter against the encroaching darkness. Their peace had been threatened, but in defending it, they had found something more profound, a partnership forged in peril, a promise of a future, hard-won and precious. The sun rose on a changed landscape, the scent of gunpowder lingering in the crisp air, but within the walls of Willow Creek Ranch, a new dawn was breaking for Jedediah Thorne and Ilara. He looked at her, truly saw her, not the cleaner, not the disabled girl, but the resilient woman who had brought light back into his shadowed world, and for whom he would gladly face any storm. The world outside Willow Creek Ranch, with its harsh judgments and lurking dangers, faded into a distant murmur. Within its fences, a quiet peace settled, earned in shared silence and cemented in common trial. Jedediah's arm healed, the scar a faint silver line, a twin to the old burn marks on Ilara's hands, reminders not of pain, but of battle survived together. The house, once a hollow shell of memories, now resonated with the quiet rhythms of their shared life. The sparse, flinty dialogue of their early days softened, replaced by comfortable silences and words spoken with gentle intention. He built her a sturdy rocking chair, its proportions perfectly suited to her, placing it by the hearth where the firelight could warm her. She, in turn, planted a small herb garden near the kitchen door, its fragrant greens a promise of nourishment and care. The vast, empty spaces in Jedediah's heart, once echoing with the ghost of Clara, began to fill with a new, tender affection for Ilara. Her quiet strength was an anchor, her resilience a daily inspiration. He found himself watching the way sunlight caught the auburn tints in her hair, the determined set of her jaw when she tackled a difficult task, the rare, soft smile that transformed her face. For Ilara, the ranch was more than a sanctuary, it was the first place she had ever felt truly seen, truly valued. Jedediah's acceptance of her, disability and all, was a balm to old wounds. His protective presence was a shield, but more than that, his slowly emerging tenderness was a gift. The scars they both bore, his etched on his soul, hers on her body, became not points of division, but bridges of understanding. One evening, as a gentle rain whispered against the window panes, mirroring the quiet contentment within, Jedediah took Ilara's scarred hand in his calloused one. His thumb traced the silvery marks. "These hands," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "they've rebuilt more than just this house." Ilara, she looked up at him, her eyes luminous in the firelight. "And yours, Jedediah," she replied softly, her gaze holding his, "have sheltered more than just a stray." No grand pronouncements were needed. Their love was a slow-growing vine, nurtured by unspoken kindness, tested by adversity, and now, blossoming in the quiet sanctuary they had built together. The haunted protector had found his redemption not in forgetting his past, but in building a new future. The resilient survivor had found not just safety, but a home, and a heart that cherished her true worth. The prairie wind still whispered its lonely songs around Willow Creek Ranch, but now, within its walls, two souls listened together, their silence no longer empty, but full of an enduring, hard-won love. They say the frontier tests the soul, stripping away artifice until only the truth of a person remains. In the vast, unyielding quiet of that land, Jedediah and Ilara found not just survival, but a profound connection, a testament to the resilience of the human heart. Their story is a whisper in the grand narrative of the West, a reminder that redemption can be found in the most unexpected encounters, and that love often blossoms in the soil of shared hardship. It teaches us that true strength is not the absence of wounds, but the courage to bear them, and that seeing beyond the surface can reveal a beauty and fortitude that society often overlooks. The greatest acts of kindness are often unspoken, the deepest bonds forged in silence, and the most meaningful homes are built not of timber and stone, but of acceptance, trust, and unwavering devotion. If their journey from desolation to hope, from isolation to a shared hearth, has touched your spirit, we invite you to subscribe to our channel. Share this story if you believe in the power of second chances and the enduring strength of love found in unlikely places. Click the notification bell so you don't miss our next tale from the heart of the frontier, where every scar tells a story, and every quiet gaze holds a universe of meaning.